Before anything else, before the story even begins to shape itself in your mind, all I'd like you to notice is how still the room around you has become. There is no rush here. There is nothing waiting for you, no task, no message, no demand. Just a slow, settling quiet. The kind that feels older than the day you just lived through. You may notice, as you lie there, that your breath has already begun to loosen. Not because you are trying, but because the body always knows how to return to its own rhythm when the world finally stops asking it to hurry. And while you listen to these words, spoken in a calm, steady tone, you might imagine the sound behind them, something like a hum, very low. Not quite a note, not quite an echo, but the gentle vibration of distance itself. A hum that seems to come from far beneath the ground. Slow, warm, unhurried. You don't need to picture it. You don't need to understand it. You only need to know that everything in this story moves at that same quiet frequency. A frequency meant to settle the weight in your shoulders, soften the tension in your hands, and steady the rhythm in your chest. And as you lie there, you may feel the edges of time begin to loosen, almost as though the hours you carried today, the busy pieces, the heavy pieces, the sharp little moments that stayed in your mind longer than they should, all of them are beginning to move away from you. Not sharply, not suddenly, but the way dusk moves across a field, slow, soft, gentle, without ever asking to be noticed. There is a place the story will take you. Not a dangerous place, not a place of fear, just a quiet valley resting somewhere outside the map of your thoughts. A valley that doesn't ask anything from you. A valley that simply is, the same way a sleeping mountain simply is. This is Blackwood Valley. You don't need to know where it sits on a real map. In fact, it's easier if you don't. Let it float in the soft, gray space behind your forehead. A shape without edges, a place without coordinates. Somewhere in that valley, there is a wooden house and a small cemetery that doesn't fear the night, not because it is haunted, but because it has grown comfortable with darkness. It has lived with it for centuries. It understands it. And inside that house, there is a quiet presence. Not someone waiting for you, not someone watching you, just someone living a slow life in a place where time moves like thick, warm air. A groundskeeper, a man whose entire world is shaped by earth and weather and memory. You won't see him yet, not now. For this chapter, for these first drifting minutes, all you need is the feeling of approaching something ancient and gentle, a landscape that has been sleeping long before you arrived in this moment and will continue resting long after the last of today's thoughts have dissolved. You might imagine, very faintly, the sound of gravel underfoot. Not a crunch, just a tiny, dispersed shifting of stones, as though someone walked along a path hours ago and the memory of their steps is still settling. You might imagine the hum again, the low, steady vibration that seems to come from the belly of the valley itself. A sound like warm air pressed against old wood, a sound without sharpness, without urgency. If breath had a color, this sound would be its shadow. As you listen, your awareness might drift outward, from the small space you're lying in to something larger. A darkness that is not empty, but full of slow-moving air and soft, wandering echoes. And if you allow yourself, you might feel your body settle further. The weight in your legs softens, your back warms, your chest rises and falls as though it's following a rhythm older than you. This rhythm belongs to the valley, a valley that has watched seasons fold over each other hundreds of times, a valley where storms arrive without drama, and where sunlight drifts slowly through dust like a hand brushing through flour. Nothing in this place rushes, nothing interrupts, nothing surprises. Everything is slow and steady and deeply, deeply quiet. You might imagine a faint breeze, not real wind, but the idea of wind, moving through tall grass, not pushing it, just nudging it enough for a few strands to shift and then settle again. Or perhaps you imagine the soft hinge creak of an old gate, not swinging open, but breathing, the way wood breathes when the temperature drops a little after sundown. None of these sounds are meant to be precise. Think of them as textured silence, shapes inside quiet, the way your mind fills in a picture when someone draws only the outlines. And slowly, very slowly, you begin to sense a path forming. It doesn't appear all at once. It's not bright, not distinct. It's more like an impression. The feeling that the earth beneath you is sloping gently forward. A direction without pressure. An invitation without words. It leads into the valley, into Blackwood's sleeping breath, into a night that has no sharp corners. And while you follow that invisible path, without effort, without even moving, the story starts to gather itself. Not quickly, not loudly, just the way fog gathers at the base of a hill, a little after dusk, thickening one pale layer at a time. Somewhere in that fog, somewhere in the comfortable dimness, a man sits beside a wooden desk, a groundskeeper, a caretaker of soil, of trees, of stones that carry names. You will meet him soon. You will see his world through slow, drifting eyes. You will hear the rhythm of his work, the sound of tools in his hands, the murmur of shifting earth. But not yet. Not in this opening chapter. This moment is only for settling, for softening, for sinking gently into the pace of the valley, a pace that exists outside urgency, outside tension, outside expectation. You're not being told a story. You're being carried into one, the way a leaf is carried by a warm, slow river. And as the hum settles deeper, as the imagined gravel fades behind you, as the valley opens like a soft breath, you drift. You drift without moving. You drift without trying. You drift into the quiet, into Blackwood Valley, where the ground sleeps, where memory rests, where the world grows soft and very, very still. The valley appears before you slowly, not as a vivid picture, but as a gentle suggestion, the way a shape emerges behind a soft curtain of fog. Blackwood Valley does not rush into view. It lets itself be found, as though it has been waiting for you in the quiet place just behind your thoughts, a place your mind only visits when it becomes very calm and very, very still. Imagine standing at the edge of a long gravel road, not a road you must walk, but one your attention drifts along, like the memory of a path you might have taken once, a long time ago. The gravel does not crunch. It shifts, softly, gently, reluctantly, as though even the stones have learned the unhurried rhythm of this land, a rhythm that stretches and breathes like a deep sigh settling into earth. The air here feels thick with quiet, not heavy, not suffocating, just full, as if the valley carries more silence than the world outside knows what to do with. And within that silence, there are threads of sound so small you might not notice them at first. A faint stirring of grass, a distant creak of wood, a breath of wind slipping through cedar branches with the softness of a memory. Nothing here interrupts, nothing here surprises. Everything in Blackwood Valley moves with the patience of something ancient as your awareness drifts downward, lower and lower and lower. You begin to sense the landscape opening around you. To one side, the slope of a hill leans gently into shadow. To the other, thin trees rise with the quiet posture of old guardians, not watchful, not stern, simply present, the way old trees are. And at the center of it all, resting on a small rise of land just high enough to catch the last of the evening light, is a house built from dark, seasoned wood, a house that has never tried to shine, never tried to stand out, never tried to be anything other than exactly what it is, a place to live slowly. The boards of the porch are worn, but not weak. They have held footsteps for decades, light ones, heavy ones, hurried ones once upon a time, but mostly unhurried these days. If wood could remember, these boards would remember the soles of boots covered in earth, the long pauses before sunrise, and the steady weight of a man who has lived more years with soil than with people. You might imagine the faintest creak, not of something breaking, but of something that has expanded and softened through countless seasons. The kind of creak that sounds almost like a greeting, a low, warm acknowledgement. Behind the house sits a small cemetery, not the kind with rows of perfect symmetry and polished marble gleaming under polished lawns. No, Blackwood Cemetery is older than that, gentler than that. It is a place shaped by time, not by maintenance schedules. The headstones tilt slightly, as though the earth beneath them shifts with slow breaths. Names carved long ago have blurred into stone grain, the same way memory blurs into the mind after decades of quiet carrying. Some graves are wrapped in wild grass. Some are ringed by low, stubborn flowers that appear every spring without being planted. Some are marked only by stones gathered from the riverbed, stacked by hands that knew the person beneath the soil far better than any engraved plaque could tell. And yet, there is no sadness here. Blackwood Cemetery feels like a place where the earth is simply doing what the earth has always done. It holds, it softens, it remembers, and it rests. As your awareness drifts deeper into the valley, you might sense a warmth, not from sun, but from familiarity. A feeling like, I have been in a place like this before. Not exactly this valley, but somewhere with the same softness. Somewhere where time slows itself, unspooling like thread moving across a wooden table. Somewhere where small sounds take the place of big ones. The wind moves again, not a gust, just a slow exhale passing through tall grass. You don't hear the grass bend. You hear the idea of bending, a soft hush, a drifting of texture from one side of your awareness to the other. If you listen closer, not with your ears, but with that quiet place inside your mind, you might imagine the gentle tap of something loose on wood, a hook, a dried vine, perhaps the porch rail settling into cool air. It doesn't matter what it is. The valley does not demand accuracy. It allows you to imagine only the shadows of sound, the softest brushstrokes of movement. And somewhere within this soft dusk, you begin to sense the presence of the one who lives here, not clearly, not as a face or figure, more as a feeling, the way you might sense someone standing a few rooms away, moving slowly, calmly, at peace with the hour. The groundskeeper of Blackwood Valley moves like the valley itself, quiet, measured, certain. His life is shaped by the ground, by soil that shifts with frost and thaws, by grass that grows and falls and grows again, by stones that outlive memory and roots that cradle earth the way the valley cradles sleep. You won't meet him fully yet, not in this chapter. For now, you only sense where he lives, and that is enough. Because this first chapter is not about people, it is about place. This valley, this house, this quiet patch of land where storms arrive without anger and nights deepen like ink dissolving into warm water. A place where days do not hurry and shadows stretch without fear. A place where the smallest sounds carry more comfort than the loudest voices elsewhere. And as this chapter draws to a close, you feel yourself settling deeper into the valley's rhythm. Your breath slows, your thoughts thin, your awareness drifts like a lantern floating down a slow river toward gentle darkness. Blackwood Valley welcomes you, not with excitement, not with ceremony, but with something far quieter, the kind of welcome that feels like a soft blanket pulled up to your shoulders as someone turns out the light. You are not asked to do anything. You are not asked to remember. You are simply invited to rest in the valley's silence, to breathe with its breath, to move with its slowness, to drift with its night. Before Clay ever became a man, before he learned the weight of tools or the rhythm of digging, he was simply a child wandering through the stillness of Blackwood Valley, not wandering with purpose, not exploring with curiosity, just moving the way a leaf moves through a slow current, drifting where the quiet air guided him. He grew up in the wooden house that sits at the valley center, a house that seemed to breathe alongside the land around it. Most children grow up with playgrounds and sidewalks and the shifting noise of town life. Clay grew up with soil, with grass, with stones that carried names he could not yet pronounce. To him, the cemetery was not a place of endings. It was simply part of the landscape, as natural as a field, as familiar as the bend in a stream. He learned to walk by holding on to the cool edges of old gravestones, steadying himself on granite carved decades before he was born. The stones did not frighten him. They held stillness the way a mother holds a child, gently, quietly, without demand. He would trace the shapes carved into them with small, curious fingers, loops of letters, curves, dates, symbols softened by time. He didn't yet understand that they were names. He only knew they felt smooth under his hands, cold in winter, warm by late afternoon. Clay spent hours moving between the stones, not playing, just existing among them, listening to the textures of the valley. The valley always had textures, even when it seemed silent. He heard the faint scratch of grass brushing against weathered marble. He heard the low groan of cedar branches leaning into a soft breeze. He heard the dusty flutter of dry leaves scraping over stone paths long after summer had passed. He learned the sound of each tree, each patch of soil, each old plank of the porch, and without realizing it, he grew fluent in the quiet language of Blackwood Valley. One afternoon, a memory Clay would carry quietly for the rest of his life. He knelt beside a large, leaning stone nearly swallowed by moss. The moss was thick, soft beneath his palms, rich with moisture from a recent drizzle. He pressed his ear to the ground beside it, just listening. Children often listen in ways adults forget how to. Clay listened for the smallest possible sound, that almost silence inside the earth. And the earth answered, not with a voice, but with a sensation, a slow thrum, a vibration so gentle it could have been imagined. But Clay felt it, a hum beneath the soil, a long, ancient exhale. It comforted him. It made the valley feel alive, not loud, not restless, just breathing. He didn't know it then, but he would spend his entire life in that breath. Sometimes, when the weather was warm and the wind came from the south, Clay would lie on his back between the gravestones and watch the sky turn. Clouds drifted slowly above him, stretching across the horizon in pale ribbons. Every cloud seemed to move with the same unhurried rhythm as the valley. Clay matched his breathing to them without thinking. Slow inhale, slow exhale. His small chest rising and falling like a tide in miniature. In the distance, from somewhere beyond the hill, he would hear the distinct, hollow knock of his father chopping wood. Each strike landed with intention, but never aggression. His father chopped wood the same way he dug, with patience, with certainty, with a respect for material and for time. The sound carried across the valley like the steady tick of an enormous wooden clock, a clock that did not keep hours so much as seasons. Clay often fell asleep to that rhythm, sometimes for minutes, sometimes for whole afternoons. The valley never minded. The grass bent easily beneath him. The sun sat warm on his hair. The stones around him stood guard in their gentle, unmoving way. When he woke, his father was usually nearby, checking on tools, tightening handles, oiling metal edges. Clay's small feet would crunch softly through the grass as he drew closer, and his father, a quiet man himself, would simply nod in acknowledgement. Not a greeting, not a question, just a shared awareness that they were both here in this place, where things moved slowly and quietly and without complication. Clay would sit beside him, watching, absorbing the rituals of maintenance long before he understood them. In the valley, tools were not objects. They were extensions of the land, shaped by it, worn by it, returned to it after long, quiet lives. Clay touched the wooden handles, feeling the smoothness of years of use. He touched the metal blades, cool even on warm days, and he listened to the soft, rhythmic motions of his father's work, the gentle scrape of sandpaper, The faint clink of metal on metal, the whispering slide of a wooden handle being checked for splinters. It was a different kind of lullaby, a lullaby made of patience, a lullaby made of craft, a lullaby made of earth and wood and the quiet hands that worked them. As seasons passed, Clay began to explore further. Not far. The valley never needed distance to feel wide, but enough that he learned the subtle differences between each corner of the land. He learned the scent of the shallow stream after rain, a mix of wet stone and cold iron and something faintly green. He learned the texture of the hillside soil, loose at the surface, dense beneath, full of roots that curled like old sleeping animals. He learned how the wooden house sounded from the outside, its small creaks, its settling sighs, its long, mellow echoes when the temperature shifted after sunset. All of it became familiar. All of it became part of him. And yet, Clay never felt fear. Children sometimes fear shadows or silence or the suggestion of the unknown. But Clay's world was different. Blackwood Valley did not hide things. It revealed them. Slowly, softly, with the same careful touch as a parent smoothing a blanket. Nothing jumped, nothing startled, nothing twisted suddenly out of place. Even the darkest nights were full of gentle sounds, the tick of cooling branches, the brush of quiet animals moving through brush, the whisper of wind sliding through narrow spaces between stones. Clay slept easily in those nights, not because he was tired, but because the valley made rest feel natural. The earth itself seemed to tell him that everything had its rhythm, and that his own rhythm could slow as much as it needed. Years later, when Clay would grow into his work, he would realize that most people saw cemeteries as places of fear or sorrow. He would see the tight shoulders, the held breath, the quickened steps. But for him, for the child who grew up cradled by stone and soil, the cemetery was a cradle of quiet, a place where life and stillness coexisted without conflict. He had learned that long before he understood it. And somewhere in those early years, as he wandered barefoot across warm earth, as he ran his fingers along the edges of stories carved into stone, as he listened to the hum gentle beneath the soil, the valley gave him its first lesson. Nothing in nature moves quickly unless it must. Clay would live by that rhythm his entire life. He would work by it. He would breathe by it. And eventually, he would teach it to someone else who came after him. But that will come later. For now, Clay remains the child of the valley, a quiet shape moving through quiet land, a small figure cradled between stones and sky. The earth hums softly beneath him. The grass sways in gentle arcs. The light falls in warm, patient strokes, and the story drifts forward, one slow breath at a time. Clay's real lessons did not begin with tools or with tasks, but with textures, textures of soil, textures of weather, textures of the quiet world beneath his feet. Before he ever dug a single inch of ground, his father insisted he learn how the valley felt, not from a book, not from a rule, but through slow attention, through patient listening, through standing still enough that the earth revealed its small, steady rhythms. Everything begins with the ground, his father told him one morning, the sky still holding the pale blue of the hour before full daylight. And so Clay stood beside him, just beyond the porch, where the soil opened out into the gentle rise that led toward the first row of stones. His father knelt, pressing his palm into the earth. "Feel this," he said. "Tell me what it says." Clay mimicked him, kneeling slowly, letting his hand sink into the cool, grainy surface. It felt damp, not wet, just touched by the memory of night dew. "It's soft," Clay said quietly. His father nodded. "But soft in which way?" Clay searched for the answer, his small fingers moving lightly over the soil. "It gives," he said finally. "It lets me press into it." "That's right." His father's voice was steady, low, without excitement. "Soft because it's rested. Soft because it hasn't been asked to hold anything in a while." Clay liked that idea. That dirt could rest, that earth could take time to loosen and breathe. "Now feel deeper." His father took Clay's hand gently, guiding his fingers to press past the top layer. The soil changed. Just half an inch down, the texture grew denser, cooler, more compact. Clay looked up. "This part doesn't give." "That's the earth remembering its shape," his father said quietly. "Every land has its memory. Some memories are loose, some are tight. This valley remembers slowly." Clay didn't fully understand, but the valley did not ask him to. It only asked him to listen, and he was good at listening. His father stood and brushed the dirt from his hands. "Come," he said. "The rain is coming. It's time you learn how water changes everything." They walked together toward the wide clearing just beyond the cemetery fence, where the ground was bare enough to show water's movements clearly. The sky above them was shifting, clouds gathering in long gray strokes, the light slowly dimming, the air tightening with the faint scent of approaching moisture. His father lifted his face to the sky and closed his eyes, listening. "Rain has a sound before it ever falls," he said softly. Clay waited, trying to hear what his father heard. At first, there was only silence, the familiar stillness of Blackwood's morning. But then, very faint, very distant, he noticed a tiny change, a soft tension in the air, a subtle hush moving across the valley, as though the land were preparing itself. The leaves on the nearest tree shifted without wind, a slight trembling, as if touched by invisible fingertips. "That sound," Clay whispered, eyes widening just a little. His father smiled, a rare, gentle curve of the mouth. "Rain doesn't begin when the drops fall," he said. "It begins when the valley inhales." A moment later, the first drop arrived. Not a splash, a soft tap on the sleeve of Clay's shirt, then another on the toe of his boot, then another on the back of his hand, cold and round and strangely comforting. As the rain began to fall steadily, Clay watched the soil transform. Damp patches spread outward, darkening the brown surface. Small rivulets formed between pebbles, moving slowly, finding paths with the patience of creatures uncertain of where they want to go. The ground, so firm moments ago, softened beneath the touch of water. His father knelt again, pressing 2 fingers into the changing soil. "Feel it now," he said. Clay knelt beside him and placed his hand once more on the earth's surface. Everything was different. The soil had loosened, become pliable, like warm clay being shaped by gentle pressure. "It's softer," Clay whispered. "Yes," his father said, "but softer for different reasons than before. Before the earth was rested, now it has opened." He scooped up a small handful, letting it fall slowly through his fingers. "The rain asks the ground to receive," he murmured, "and the ground, if it's ready, says yes." Clay watched, mesmerized by how simple the transformation looked, how natural. Rainfall grew steadier. Each drop pattered softly against earth and stone and grass, forming a slow, soothing rhythm, a rhythm the valley seemed to hum along with. His father motioned toward a slight depression in the ground, where water was beginning to collect. "See how the earth drinks?" Clay nodded. The water sank into the soil slowly. No rush, no sudden disappearance. Just a gentle absorption as the land took what it needed. A moment later, a thin stream formed, traveling downhill toward the lowest part of the clearing. Clay followed it with his eyes. "It's like the ground is telling the water where to go." His father nodded. "Water always listens, and earth always guides." They stood together in the rain, watching the valley breathe. It was not cold, just cool enough to feel awake. The droplets tapping their skin were light, comforting, softened by the windless air. "This is why we wait for weather to teach," his father said. "No book, no voice, no tool can show you what rain shows." He placed a hand on Clay's shoulder. "To dig is to understand how water moves, how soil changes, how the ground opens and how it closes." The rain grew heavier now, thickening into long, steady curtains that blurred the edges of the landscape. Gravestones shimmered through the mist, their outlines softening, like memories fading into deeper layers of time. The wooden house stood still and patient, its roof welcoming the gentle drumming of raindrops landing in soft, irregular patterns, almost musical in their randomness. Clay watched the way water wrapped around everything: the porch steps, the tall grass, the small stones embedded in the path. Nothing resisted, nothing fought. Everything accepted the rain with quiet agreement. "Every season brings its own lessons," his father said. "But rain is the valley's most patient teacher." He reached down and gathered another handful of wet soil. "Hold this," he said. Clay cupped his hands as his father placed the cool, heavy earth into his palms. The soil held its shape at first. Then slowly, very slowly, it began to sag, the water within it redistributing itself as gravity pulled it downward. Clay's fingers sank slightly into it. He felt the grit. He felt the warmth beneath the moisture. And he felt the gentle pull as the earth settled into itself. "When the ground is like this," his father said softly, "it listens best." Clay looked up through the rain. "Listens to what?" His father simply smiled. "To us," he said, "and to those who come to rest in it." They stayed outside until the rain softened again, the sky lightening with the calm gray of a valley returning to its natural pace. When they finally walked back toward the house, Clay felt the weight of the damp soil still lingering in his palms. Not physically, but in memory. He knew, without fully understanding how, that this lesson would stay with him for the rest of his life. The earth opens, the earth closes, the earth rests, the earth drinks, and the rain is the quiet moment when everything becomes soft enough to learn again. As they reached the porch, Clay looked back once more at the clearing, at the slow movement of water, at the shifting textures of soil. The valley felt different now, not changed, but understood in a deeper way than before. The ground held stories, and the rain was one of the ways it told them. The first time Clay stood beside an open grave, he did not feel fear. He felt rhythm, a rhythm so steady it might have been the heartbeat of the valley itself. His father had chosen a clear morning, a morning when the air felt cool but not cold, and the soil was firm but not stubborn. A morning made for working, a morning meant for teaching. Clay stood with his hands resting gently at his sides, watching his father walk the boundaries of the rectangular space marked by 4 wooden stakes and a line of twine stretched between them. "This," his father said, "is where we begin." He tapped one stake lightly with his boot. The sound was soft, a muted knock against dry wood. Clay leaned in slightly, as though listening to the valley breathe. Each stake stood about a foot tall, driven firmly into the ground, holding the shape of what would soon be an opening. Not a violent one, not a sudden one, but a measured, respectful one. Every grave began with 4 corners and the quiet intention of the person who marked them. "Watch," his father said. "Don't just look, watch." He took the round point shovel, the one Clay had held in the shed, and pressed its blade into the earth at the first corner. The shovel entered the soil with a low, patient sound, a soft thump, as though the ground were exhaling around it. Clay leaned closer. "It asks first," his father reminded him. "This shovel doesn't demand." He lifted a small wedge of earth, turned, and set it gently aside. The soil fell with a soft crumble, like a warm loaf of bread breaking under a slow hand. Then another scoop, and another. Each movement matched the last in rhythm, in breath, in the soft flex of his father's shoulders. Dig, step, lift, turn. Dig, step, lift, turn. It was not a chant, not a rule, but a rhythm older than any instruction. A rhythm that belonged to labor and patience, and the long understanding between the earth and the ones who tended it. Clay listened to the pattern the way he once listened to rain forming over the valley. The shovel bit the ground, the earth gave, the soil rose and fell in slow brown arcs. When the top layer loosened enough, his father stepped back and motioned Clay forward. "Your turn," he said. Clay felt the weight of the moment, not a burden, but a gentle responsibility settling across his small shoulders. He gripped the handle, letting the wood rest between the lines of his palms. "Feet steady," his father murmured. "Arms soft, not stiff. Let the tool do the asking." Clay pressed the blade down. The earth resisted at first, holding its shape, remembering itself. But Clay leaned gently, letting his weight, not his strength, encourage the shovel downward. The blade sank, a little. "Enough." His father nodded. "That's it. The ground knows you now." Clay lifted the soil, heavy, damp from morning dew, and set it beside the first pile. The earth landed with a soft thud, breaking apart, its grain shifting in tiny avalanches that made no sound but suggested movement. Clay exhaled slowly. The rhythm took shape in his body, awkward at first, then smoother, then almost natural. Dig, step, lift, turn. The sun rose higher as they worked. Birds began their quiet calls. The valley's morning hum deepened. Clay felt time loosen, stretch, unspool, the way a rope unwinds without resistance. The rectangular shape grew more distinct. The top layer of sod peeled away to reveal firmer soil beneath, darker and cooler to the touch. After a while, his father held up a hand. "Enough for now," he said gently. "The rest needs the machine." Clay looked up just as his father turned toward the small backhoe parked several yards away. He had seen it many times, but it always surprised him how quiet it seemed when not in use, as though even the machine respected the stillness of Blackwood Valley. His father climbed into the seat, settled his hands on the controls, and exhaled once, long and steady, before turning the key. The engine rumbled to life, but even its rumble felt softened, muted by the valley's calm. The backhoe moved forward with slow, deliberate motion. Clay stepped back, watching the metal arm extend, the bucket lowering as though bowing to the earth. The first scoop of soil rattled softly into the bucket. Then the arm lifted, and the dirt slid out into the growing pile with a long, grainy whisper. Every motion was measured, controlled, respectful. His father worked the machine the same way he worked with shovels, with patience, with attention, with an understanding that haste had no place here. The digging continued, each scoop carving deeper into the cool shade of the opening grave. Clay sat on the grass, knees pulled to his chest, listening to the quiet conversation between machine and earth. Metal bit soil, earth yielded, soil spilled, silence returned, bit, yield, spill, stillness. The machine did not hurry. It carved with the same calm precision his father used with hand tools. After a time, the machine stopped. His father climbed down and motioned Clay to the edge. "Look," he said. Clay peered into the space, a clean rectangle, deepening into shadow, its walls smooth, its corners neat. But his father shook his head. "It's not done," he said. "Machines do the heavy work, hands do the true work." He handed Clay the square point shovel. "Down you go." Clay descended carefully, feeling the temperature shift as he entered the grave. The air was cooler, the earth denser, the scent deeper, a scent like old wood, like stone, like the memory of rain. His father knelt at the edge, watching with quiet approval. "The bottom needs smoothing," he said. "Make it level. Let the ground feel ready." Clay worked slowly, drawing the shovel across the floor of the grave. The blade whispered against the packed earth, pressing it flat, even, steady. He checked the corners, cleaning out loose soil. He checked the walls, scraping away tiny imperfections left by the machine's bucket. Every small motion made the space feel calmer, more intentional, more complete. His father finally nodded. "Good," he said softly. "You're learning the rhythm." Clay stood, his hands warm around the handle, his breath slow, his body attuned to the quiet the grave demanded. But the lesson was not finished. His father handed down one more tool, the long, heavy tamping bar. Clay gripped it carefully. "This is the last touch," his father said. Press the earth, settle it, show the ground it can rest again. Clay lifted the bar and brought it down, not hard, but firmly. The end struck the earth with a deep, soft thump, a sound that seemed to resonate down into the soil and outward through Clay's arms. He moved along the surface, tamping with slow, even strokes. Thump, thump, thump. Each impact flattened the soil a little more, smoothing the earth into a quiet readiness. His father watched in respectful silence. When Clay finished, he set the tamping bar aside. The grave looked calm, a still, rectangular pool of dark soil, waiting without urgency. "Now," his father said gently, "we cover it, for now." Together, they laid a wooden board across the top, a protective lid to keep animals from wandering near, and to let the ground rest until the day of the burial. As they stepped back, Clay felt the familiar hum beneath his feet, the same hum he had felt as a child pressing his ear to the ground. "It's quiet," Clay whispered. "It's listening," his father corrected softly. They stood together, watching the light shift across the grass, across the stones, across the wooden board that protected the open grave. The valley was calm, the air was still, and Clay could feel the slow rhythm of digging settle deeper into him, a rhythm he would one day know as naturally as his own breath. A rhythm of earth asked, earth opened, earth shaped, earth returned, a rhythm of hand and machine, tool and soil, sound and silence, a rhythm older than memory, older than language, older than fear, a rhythm the valley whispered into him, one gentle lesson at a time. There are days in Blackwood Valley that begin before the sun decides whether it wants to rise. These are the days when the groundskeeper's work unfolds like a quiet timetable, not rushed, not forced, but laid out in simple, steady steps that the valley has learned as well as he has. Clay woke each morning to the same soft sequence of sounds, the low creak of wood settling beneath the night's cool weight, the faint rustle of blankets adjusting, the long breath that gently escaped his chest before his mind fully returned to waking. And always, always, there was the valley's hum, that deep vibration too low to be sound, too steady to be silence. It greeted him like a familiar companion. At over 6:30 a.m., Clay would step out onto the porch with a small notebook in his hand. The notebook was not for writing feelings or stories or reflections. It held lists, simple, essential lists. Monday, 2 burials. Tuesday, stone cleaning. Wednesday, stump removal. Thursday, grounds maintenance. Friday, vault delivery. Saturday, 1 military interment. Sunday, quiet day. Each line written in the same careful hand, letters even and steady, as though uniformity was its own kind of respect. He reviewed the day's entries with slow, deliberate attention, allowing the tasks to settle into his thoughts without urgency. Some days were heavy, some days were easy, but all days belonged to the rhythm of the land. This day, the one we walk through now, was a typical one. Not dramatic, not eventful, just full in the calm way a valley morning can be. 7 a.m. Tool preparation. Clay entered the shed, letting his hand slide along the grain of the wooden doorframe as he passed. Inside, the familiar coolness wrapped itself around him. The tools hung in their places, outlined by faint diagonal lights sluicing in from the dusty window. Square point shovel, round point shovel, spade, mattock, tamping bar, wheelbarrow, soil probe, measuring rods, lowering straps, canvas sheets, small rake, 2 wedges of cedar for leveling. He gathered them one by one, the sound of metal meeting metal echoing softly. A quiet symphony of clinks and taps, and the faint scrape of steel brushing steel. He loaded the wheelbarrow with everything he needed, balancing the weight out of long habit. As he pushed it out of the shed, the wheel turned slowly over gravel, a sound like a soft grind, steady and patient. 07:15 a.m., walking the grounds. Clay always walked the cemetery before beginning any single task. It wasn't a rule, it wasn't tradition, it was simply what he did. He passed the stones in long, unhurried strides, his steps matching the quiet rhythm of the valley air. Each stone had its own presence, not its own story, because stories belong to the living, but its own weight. Granite stones stood tall, strong-backed, their surfaces cool and unyielding. Marble markers gleamed faintly, even under soft light, patterns of gray veining rippling through them like frozen breath. Limestone pieces carried warm tones, edges softened by time, names fading gently as weather brushed them year after year. Clay walked. He checked the grass, checked for erosion, checked the settling of recent graves, checked the path where the roots of the large elm like to push upward every spring, all in silence, all in a calm, observant rhythm. 08 a.m., the morning burial site. The first task of the day was preparation. Clay approached the site marked the day before, a rectangle of twine held in place by 4 stakes. He gently pulled the twine upward, resetting any slack the night wind might have caused. Then he pressed the soil probe into the ground 3 times. The probe met resistance at 4 inches, 11 inches, 19 inches root. Old clay shelf, stone patch. He noted it all quietly, the way a musician notes subtle changes in an instrument's tone. Next came the backhoe. It waited at the edge of the cemetery, paint faded by years of sun, engine calm in the morning cool. Clay climbed into the seat and allowed himself a moment of stillness, hands resting on the machine's silent controls. Then he turned the key. The machine hummed to life, a hum that blended with the valley's deeper one, layering sound upon quiet sound until they merged into something both mechanical and natural. The digging began. Arm extend, bucket lower, teeth bite, earth lift, swing, release, scoop, lift, turn, empty. The cycle repeated in slow, deliberate arcs. Clay never rushed. He didn't need to. The earth responded better to patience. Once the grave reached a depth of roughly 5 feet, he stopped the machine and climbed down. Hand tools did the rest. Square point shovel to clear the bottom, spade to refine the edges, small rake to remove loose soil without disturbing the shape. The tamping bar pressed the corners into firmness. By 09:30 a.m., the grave was ready. Clay set a plywood board over the top to protect the opening. He brushed the dust from his hands. He breathed the slow, cool air. He whispered, not a prayer, not a ritual, just a simple acknowledgement to the soil beneath him. Rest for now. 9:45. 15-minute break. Clay rarely sat, but today he lowered himself onto the porch step of the small storage building near the cemetery gate. He sipped water from a metal canteen. Across the valley, morning light shifted from pale gold to soft amber. Birds moved in slow arcs from fence post to branch. The air warmed just enough to loosen his muscles. Then the break was over in the same soft way it began, naturally, gently, without hurry. 10 a.m. Ceremony. Setup. Before a burial, Clay prepared the site with a kind of reverence that wasn't religious but practical. He unfolded a small green canopy and set it over the grave. Each leg made a muted metallic click as it locked into place. He laid out the artificial turf panels, soft, deep green, their fibers gently brushing his hands as he arranged them clockwise. North panel, east panel, south panel, west panel. Then the folding chairs, 6 on each side, opened with quiet snaps and soft sighs of fabric. Last came the lowering device. Its polished bars caught the late morning light as he placed it carefully over the grave's opening. The straps, woven and sturdy, lay coiled at its base, waiting to carry the casket into the earth with slow, sure grace. Everything had its position, everything had its logic, everything had its quiet. 11:45 a.m. Final check. Before lunch, Clay walked the perimeter of the burial site, eyes tracing every line with calm precision. He checked the canopy ties, checked the turf alignment, checked the lowering straps for twists or tension. Then he stepped back, hands on his hips, and simply breathed. The site was ready, not perfect. Nothing in nature is meant to be perfect, but prepared with patience and stillness. 12 p.m. Lunch break. Lunch for Clay was never a loud affair. He returned to the porch, unwrapped a simple meal from a metal tin. Bread, cheese, an apple sliced with clean strokes from a pocket knife older than he was. The valley rested with him. Wind slowed, light softened. The hum of distant insects took on a lower, warmer tone. Clay ate quietly, noticing the texture of the bread, the faint sweetness of the apple, the way the stillness settled once again around him. 1 p.m. Afternoon, burial. The family arrived in small groups, their footsteps soft against the turf Clay had laid. He stood a respectful distance away, present but invisible, the way groundskeepers are meant to be. The funeral director gave him a nod, a silent cue. The pallbearers approached, their hands steady, their breath slow, their bodies moving as though the air were thicker around them. Clay guided the straps under the casket. He adjusted them, one corner, then another, until the weight balanced evenly. When the moment came, he turned the lever. The device responded with patient, measured motion. The casket descended, inch by inch, without a sound other than the soft whisper of fabric moving against fabric. When it reached the bottom, Clay locked the mechanism with a gentle click. He stepped back. The family lowered their heads. Silence gathered, not heavy, not sharp, just present, warm, still. 02:15 p.m., closing the grave. When the family left, Clay removed the canopy and folded the chairs. He turned the device's crank in reverse, lifting the straps back up one quiet rotation at a time. Then came the soil. The first layer was always returned by hand, a symbolic gesture, but one Clay treated with the same care as every other part of his work. He emptied the first shovel of earth It landed softly on the wooden lid of the casket, a muted, gentle sound, almost a sigh. Then another shovel, and another. Soon enough, it was time for the machine. He guided the backhoe forward, its engine humming in steady tones. Scoop by scoop, the grave filled. The soil settled into itself with soft, compressing sounds, a rhythm both earthy and soothing. At the final stage, Clay used the tamping bar, pressing down firmly, evenly, coaxing the ground back into the shape it wanted. The last step was smoothing the surface, making it level, clean, gentle. The grave now looked like any other piece of land, a place where grass would soon grow again, where nothing rushed, where everything returned to quiet. 3:15 p.m. Groundskeeping. Clay moved through the cemetery with his small mower, its quiet hum tracing slow patterns between the stones. Grass curled away from the blades in orderly paths. He trimmed around markers with a hand tool, slow, precise snips that made almost no sound. Fallen branches were lifted, carried, stacked. Old flowers were gathered with soft hands. Stones were brushed clean with long strokes that barely whispered against their surfaces. This was the part of the day Clay always liked best, not because it was easy, but because it felt like tending a garden that stretched across time. Or 4:30 p.m. End of day. Clay returned his tools to the shed. Each tool hung exactly where it belonged, in a pattern his father had taught him and he had never changed. Spade to the left, shovels side by side, mattock on its own hook, tamping bar in the corner, rake beside the door. He wiped each handle clean, removing soil, moisture, and the faint film of the day's work. Then he turned off the shed's light and stepped outside. The valley had begun its evening hum again. Low, steady, the sound of a landscape settling into night. As Clay walked toward his house, the sky widened above him, soft and pale, and he felt the familiar warmth of contentment settle into his chest. The day had been full, not heavy, not hard, just full in the way a good day can be. And tomorrow, as always, the rhythm would begin again. The valley did not measure time by calendars or clocks or the turning of pages. It measured time by the way the light lay on the hills, by the way the earth felt underfoot, by how the wind spoke when it moved through the trees. For Clay, the passing of years was simply the passing of seasons, and the seasons in Blackwood Valley were not sharp, not dramatic, but long and soft and deeply patient. They arrived the way dreams arrive, slowly, quietly, folding one into another until it became impossible to say exactly when one had ended and another had begun. Spring. When the ground wakes quietly, spring in Blackwood did not rush in with color. It came first as a feeling under the soles of Clay's boots. One morning, the ground that had been stiff and hard for weeks suddenly felt softer. Not wet, not muddy, just looser. He would press the heel of his boot down and sense a small give, a subtle yielding from the earth beneath. That was how he knew the freeze had broken. The frost released its grip. Roots began to move again. The deep places in the soil remembered water. On those early spring mornings, a thin mist often hung low across the cemetery, curling gently around the stones. The mist did not hide them. It softened them. Names blurred into pale shapes. Edges became suggestions. Everything looked like a memory, trying to return to focus and deciding it did not need to. Clay would walk the rows with his hands in his pockets, feeling the air, watching the way small beads of moisture clung to grass blades and to the rough faces of the older stones. He listened. In winter, sound traveled with a certain clarity, sharp, crisp, clean. In spring, it became rounder, softer at the edges, as though the air had thickened just enough to cradle each noise instead of bouncing it away. The soft drip of thawing frost beneath the eaves, the muffled squish of his boots in the shaded places where snow lingered longest, the faint crackle of ice surrendering to the first touch of morning sun. Spring was when the valley took a long, slow breath in. Grass pushed through old thatch, leaves unfurled from tight buds. Tiny white blossoms appeared, half hidden between stones and roots. Clay would kneel sometimes, brushing the soil with his fingertips, feeling the threads of new life moving beneath. This was the season when the ground felt most willing to be opened and closed. Not heavy like late summer, not rigid like deep winter, but truly awake and listening. Summer, when the air grows heavy and the soil remembers. Summer crept into Blackwood Valley without announcement. There was no sudden heat wave, no violent storm, no sharp dividing line between one season and the next. Instead, each day the air grew a little warmer, a little thicker, until eventually even the shadows felt heavy. Clay noticed it first in his breath. On winter days, exhaling left a faint cloud floating briefly in front of him. On summer days, his breath disappeared into warmth so complete that it felt like the valley had covered itself with an invisible blanket. The cemetery grass deepened in color, turning from pale green to a rich, saturated hue. It grew quickly, too quickly, and Clay's days became defined by the gentle, constant work of cutting, trimming, guiding it back into shape. The mower hummed in steady passes, clippings fell in soft, green cascades. The scent of freshly cut grass hung low and sweet above the ground, blending with the darker scent of earth warmed by the sun. Digging in summer was a different task altogether. The soil felt denser, more set in its ways. The upper layer, baked by long days of heat, held together in stubborn clumps. When Clay pressed the shovel down, the resistance traveled up the handle into his shoulders, not as pain, but as a reminder that the earth was full of memory. Each scoop released a faint dryness into the air. Dust, old pollen, crumbled roots from plants long gone. Sometimes, deep in the grave, he would strike a patch of clay baked almost solid by years of hot summers. For that, he reached for the mattock. The tool bit swung, bit again, breaking up the hardened layer in small, controlled strikes. Summer was the season of slow strength. The work felt heavier, yet the valley remained calm. Thunderheads would sometimes gather on the horizon, their towering shapes stacked high against the sky. Rain would come, sudden, hard, drumming on the canopy tents and turning the dirt paths into slick ribbons, and then leave again, as though the valley had allowed a brief burst of noise before settling once more into its regular hush. On high summer evenings, when the day's work was done and the air still shimmered with the heat it held, Clay would sit on the porch steps and watch the last light of day fade from the stones. The sky would shift from soft gold to bruised purple, and finally into a blue so dark it was almost black. Fireflies rose from the grass, blinking their small, quiet signals. And in the distance, if the night was still enough, Clay could hear the faint whirring of insects tucked into the long weeds beyond the fence. A steady, continuous murmur that built its own wordless lullaby. Autumn, when leaves fall like gentle rustling breaths. Autumn began, for Clay, the day one particular leaf let go of its branch above a certain stone. It happened almost the same way every year. The large oak on the cemetery's western edge would change before the others, its leaves shifting from deep summer green to dark, burnished gold, with veins of copper and hints of rust. He would be walking his usual morning path when one leaf, just one, would detach. It didn't tumble, it drifted. Turning slowly in the air, it caught small pieces of light as it fell, glints of sun on its surface like tiny, gentle sparks. When it landed, it made almost no sound, just a soft, dry kiss against the stone beneath it. That was when Clay knew autumn had arrived. Soon, more leaves followed. They fell in loose patterns, some landing in the grass, some gathering in the shallow dips between graves, some caught on the tops of markers, as if pausing for a moment to read the names before continuing on. The air cooled, but not sharply. It grew crisper, a clean, dry edge to each breath, making his lungs feel clearer. The sky deepened in color, even on clear days, blues turning darker, more saturated, like paint stirred slowly in a deep jar. Clay found himself spending more time with a rake in hand. The rake's tines dragged through fallen leaves with a sound like paper being folded very slowly. He gathered them into long, patient piles and carried them away, one canvas tarp at a time. Each pile held a full palette of textures: burnt orange, soft brown, dull red, faded yellow. Underneath the top layers, the leaves were cooler, damp, beginning to surrender themselves back to soil. When he lifted them, the scent rose gently, earthy, sweet, touched with the faint spice of slow decay. Autumn was the season where the cemetery looked most like a painting. Light slanted lower in the sky, casting longer shadows that stretched lazily toward the stones. Some evenings, when the air was especially clear, the entire valley seemed to glow, as if the day's last light had become trapped in the leaves themselves. Digging graves in autumn felt different too. The soil was neither as hard as summer nor as soft as spring. It held a balance, firm but forgiving, ground that understood both holding on and letting go. Clay liked autumn for that. It was the season that reminded him most clearly that everything, tree, stone, earth, breath, had its time to rise and its time to fall and its time to settle. Winter. When the valley sleeps, winter did not crash into Blackwood Valley. It did not arrive with a single storm or a single hard frost. Instead, it crept in quietly around the edges of things. It began in the mornings when Clay's breath hung in front of him longer than before, stretching into thin clouds that faded only slowly into the cold air. The grass stiffened. The soil grew firm again. Frost edged the tops of stones in delicate lace. On certain days, the sky turned a flat, uniform gray. Not angry, not stormy, just blank, as though the world had lowered a soft cloth over the sun. Then, one afternoon, snow would come, not violently, not with thunder or fierce wind. It would start with a few flakes, drifting almost lazily from the high gray sky. Clay would look up, watching them spiral down. Each flake landed without a sound, disappearing into the grass, onto stones, onto his coat. The valley grew quieter as snow thickened. Sounds became padded, muted, wrapped in white. The hum of the world seemed to drop to a deeper note. By evening, the cemetery would be covered in a thin layer of white, softening every line. Stones, fences, branches, all wrapped in a blanket of stillness. Walking the grounds in winter felt like moving through a dream. His boots pressed into the snow with a soft, compressing crunch, leaving clear prints that slowly filled with drifting powder as the wind brushed gently across them. The stones wore caps of snow, their shapes rounded, their names hidden beneath the temporary cover. For a time, the cemetery ceased to look like a place of names and dates and became simply a landscape of shapes. Gentle mounds, quiet rises, soft curves. On burial days in winter, Clay's work began differently. Before he could reach the earth, he had to clear the snow. He brushed it away from the marked gravesite, each sweep of the shovel revealing brown soil beneath the white surface. The contrast was always striking. The two colors meeting in an uneven line, the living cold tracing the edge of the sleeping warmth below. The ground, though harder, still responded. Clay knew how to read it. Where frost ran deepest, he adjusted the grave location slightly, choosing places where the sun touched a bit longer each day. If the dirt resisted stubbornly, he let the mattock speak first. Slow, patient blows that cracked the frozen layer without forcing anything. Winter was the season of doing less and noticing more. There were fewer burials, fewer visitors, longer shadows, longer nights. In those nights, the valley sometimes felt as though it were holding its breath, not from fear, but from rest. The wooden house stayed warm. Inside, the stove crackled softly, its low flames casting golden light over familiar walls. Clay would sit by the window, watching snow fall in drifting curtains, each flake a tiny piece of silence, finding its place on the world. He listened to the house settle around him, the gentle pops and sighs of timber adjusting to temperature, the faint ticking of cooling metal, the old boards beneath his feet relaxing into the deep cold. And beneath it all, even then, even in the stillness of winter, he could feel it, the valley's hum, quieter, slower, so deep it barely registered as sound at all. The hum of roots holding to earth, the hum of stones resting in their long watch, the hum of stories already finished, already surrendered, already at peace. Winter was Blackwood's sleep, not an ending, never an ending, just the longest, deepest part of its breathing. For Clay, the seasons did not come and go. They turned, slowly, smoothly, endlessly. Spring softened the ground. Summer strengthened it. Autumn loosened its grip. Winter wrapped it in rest. Year after year after year, he moved with them, digging, smoothing, watching, listening, until his own life began to feel less like a straight line and more like a circle, turning quietly with the valley's patient clock. And as the seasons turned, one thing never changed: the hum beneath his feet, steady and low, reminding him that the earth was always there, always holding, always listening, always ready to receive, to carry, to rest. There are places in Blackwood Valley where the past rests so quietly that you can walk through it without realizing you've crossed a threshold. Not a doorway, not a gate, just a shifting in the air, a soft thinning between now and then. Clay knew these places well. They weren't marked. They didn't need to be. You found them the way you find a change in weather, not by looking, but by feeling. A slight coolness, a slow hush, a tiny tightening in the clean morning wind. This was where the older stones lived, stones from the 1800s, leaning slightly, their edges rounded from decades of snow, rain, wind, sun, and stillness. Stones with names that once belonged to entire lives, lives full of breath and movement that had long since rejoined the soil. Clay walked this section on quiet mornings when no ceremonies were scheduled, and the valley felt especially open and gentle. He brought no tools on these walks, not even a cloth or a brush. He brought only his hands and his breath and his slow steps through the long grass. Old names softened by time. The first stone Clay liked to visit was a tall, thin marker with a rounded top, a shape like the arch of a doorway or the curve of a slow wave. The name carved across it had faded so much that the letters looked like shadows rather than lines. The date read 1847, 1903. Clay traced the numbers with the pads of his fingers, feeling the shallow grooves cut by hands long gone. The stone was warm from the morning sun. A thin vine had wrapped itself around the right side in a soft green spiral, its leaves trembling gently at the slightest breeze. Clay didn't remove the vine. He simply guided it slightly to the side, letting it continue its climb without covering the name completely. He whispered a quiet greeting, not to the person buried there, but to the story, the lived experience now distilled into silence. The silence felt friendly, welcoming, steady. He stood for a moment longer, then moved on. Little stones left by little hands. A few rows deeper into the old section, Clay stopped at a smaller marker, a simple, rectangular slab no taller than his shin. Children's graves always held a different kind of stillness, not heavy, not dark, just delicate, like a thin sheet of light resting over the earth. Clay knelt beside the stone. Someone, likely a visitor from years past, had left 3 tiny pebbles on the top edge, one white, one gray, one speckled. They were arranged in a crooked little line, as if a child's hand had placed them there with earnest precision. Clay touched each stone with a soft tap of his fingertips. He did not move them. He did not clean them. He simply acknowledged them, tokens of quiet memory that no one claimed, but everyone understood. A small bird landed on the branch above him, ruffling its feathers in the cool morning air. Its presence felt appropriate, gentle, not intrusive, part of the natural rhythm of the place. Clay rose slowly, dusting the grass from his knees, then continued along the row. The book-shaped marker. Further down the path, Clay reached a stone carved in the shape of a book. Its spine faced upward. Its pages were etched with tiny grooves that mimicked the texture of paper. The name on it belonged to an old school teacher, a woman who'd lived more than a century before Clay was born. Clay always paused here longer than usual. He imagined the book as a symbol, not of knowledge, but of the gentle routine of someone who spent her life teaching quiet things to quiet children in a quiet valley. He pictured her sitting behind a wooden desk, hands folded, voice calm, eyes kind. A presence the valley had once known well. The engraved pages held a short phrase, barely readable now, a life given to learning. Clay brushed a bit of moss away with the back of his knuckle. "And still learning," he murmured softly, a phrase he never intended to say out loud, but which always came when he stood at this marker. The valley seemed to approve. A small breeze stirred the grass, cool and brief, like a nod. The order of names. Clay walked further into the older rows, where stones leaned at angles as if settling deeper into the stories beneath them. Some had toppled years before Clay was born, and now lay flat against the earth, half covered in lichen and moss. Others stood upright, proud despite their age, bearing marks of weather and time and small creatures that had brushed against them in passing. Clay moved slowly, reading the names in his mind as he walked. Evelyn P. Carter, Matthew H. Wilkes, Dorian James, Wilder, Helen Merrow, Samuel Bishop, Ruth Ann Callister, Abraham Pike. Names that once meant everything to someone. Names that now floated like gentle echoes in the wide, quiet air. He didn't rush. He didn't linger. He simply let each name rise and fall like a slow breath. Unmarked graves in the art of listening. Toward the far end of the old section lay several depressions in the earth. Not deep, not dangerous, just subtle dips in the contour of the land. These were unmarked graves. Clay knelt beside one, pressing his palm lightly against the cool soil. He closed his eyes. There was no voice beneath, no whisper, no message. Just the steady hum of the valley, the same hum everywhere, but here, a little deeper, a little slower, as if settling comfortably into its long rest. Clay breathed with it, calmly, evenly, matching its rhythm without effort. "Rest well," he murmured, not to a person, but to the shape of the land and the memory it held. Brushing the past back into view. One of Clay's quiet practices, one his father had never taught him, but which he began instinctively, was brushing old stones clean, not with chemicals, not with harsh tools, just a soft bristled brush, a bucket of water, and the slow, circular movements of his own hands. He approached a stone whose lettering had been almost erased by decades of wind and rain. The name was barely visible, Jonathan W. No last name, no date. Clay dipped the brush into the water and began to sweep gently along the stone surface. The bristles whispered as they moved, a low rhythmic sound like distant waves on a calm shore. Bits of dust and thin layers of grime lifted away in soft, dark streaks. The letters emerged a little more clearly, not perfect, not restored, just enough to be seen again. Clay sat back on his heels, watched the water run down, leaving clean trails that darkened the stone before drying back to its natural gray. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The act was its own language. A quiet bench for quiet thoughts. Near the oldest oak in that section stood a weathered wooden bench, built decades ago, repaired countless times, always kept in the same shaded spot. Clay sat on it now, hands resting loosely on his thighs, feet flat on the cool ground. He watched sunlight filter through branches, laying soft, shifting patterns across the graves. The breeze carried a faint, earthy scent, fallen leaves, dry grass, old wood. Above him, the leaves made a soft rustling, like paper being turned with gentle fingers. Clay breathed slowly. He let the stillness settle from the top of his head to the tips of his boots. He didn't think about work. He didn't think about time. He simply rested. Just a few minutes. Just enough. Every marker is a chapter. After sitting for a while, Clay rose and resumed his walk. He moved deeper into the old section, his steps soft, unhurried. He saw stones shaped like arches, pillars, crosses, books, lambs, circles, urns, and simple flat markers with nothing more than a name and two numbers separated by a short dash. He placed his hand on each one, just a touch, just a moment, not reading, not imagining, only acknowledging the presence of a life that once moved, breathed, laughed, rested, and now lay quiet beneath his feet. Clay didn't try to remember their stories. He understood something deeper. Not all stories need remembering. Some only need recognizing. The valley's long memory. In many places, grass had grown in thick tufts around the stones, the deep-rooted kind that lasted decades without thinning. Clay brushed the blades with his hand as he passed. They bent easily, springing back into place like old habits, resuming themselves without thought. At the northern edge of the old section, the ground dipped into a shallow hollow where water collected after rain. It was here that the oldest stones stood, the ones too weathered to read, their surfaces rough and grainy, their shapes softened into gentle curves by time. Clay walked to them with a kind of reverence he rarely showed in other parts of the grounds. These stones belonged to people whose stories no one alive could remember. Yet the valley remembered. The earth beneath held every footstep, every breath, every cycle of birth and death that had unfolded here long before Clay ever walked the land. He knelt beside one stone so worn it had almost become a natural part of the landscape, a curved rise rather than an object. He placed his hand on its surface. The stone was cool, but not unfriendly, its texture gritty, ancient, comforting in its solidity. Clay closed his eyes. He didn't try to imagine who rested there. He didn't try to find meaning in the vanished name. He simply breathed, matching the valley's deep rhythm. Slow inhale, slow exhale. And for a moment, the world felt as still as the single breath between two distant seasons. Clay rose again, dusting off his palms, and walked back toward the newer rows, toward the present, feeling the quiet weight of the past rest gently behind him. He did not feel sorrow. He did not feel melancholy. He felt steadiness, continuity, the soft reassurance that nothing truly disappears. It simply settles into a different kind of quiet. Stories left in stone are not meant to be read like books or recited like histories. They are meant to be walked among, felt, acknowledged, and allowed to rest. And in Blackwood Valley, everything rested well. even the past. There came a time, quietly, steadily, without drama, when the valley knew that Frank's work was nearly finished. It did not announce this with storms or omens or sudden chills in the air. It announced it the way seasons change. A little slower step, a little longer pause, a little more weight on the railing when climbing the porch stairs. Clay noticed in the way his father sat at the end of the day. The man who once moved through the cemetery like a steady, thoughtful wind had begun to move more like the trees, rooted, measured, turning his head with patience rather than haste. His hands were still strong, his eyes were still clear, but his shoulders carried a softness that hadn't been there before, as if the valley itself had begun gently taking some of the weight back from him. There were no hospital rooms, no bright fluorescent lights, no rows of waiting chairs, just the house, the valley, the familiar slow rhythm of days that looked almost like every other day, until one of them didn't. A quiet evening. On the last evening, the sky over Blackwood Valley was calm. The air was cool but not cold, carrying the faint scent of cut grass and distant wood smoke. Frank sat in his usual chair by the window, hands resting loosely on his knees, eyes turned toward the fading light. Clay moved about the house, tidying small things, not because they needed it, but because motion sometimes made it easier to be with the unspoken. "Sit," Frank said gently. Just that one word, soft, low. Clay obeyed. The chair opposite creaked faintly as he settled into it. For a while, they said nothing. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was full, like the silence between two lines of a poem, the part that makes both lines matter more. "You'll do well," Frank said eventually, his voice as calm as if he were discussing a fence repair or a change in weather. Clay looked at him, but Frank's gaze remained on the window, on the slowly darkening valley. "You listen to the ground," Frank continued. "That's what matters." Clay swallowed, his throat suddenly tight. "I learned from you," he answered quietly. Frank nodded once, as if that confirmed something he had long suspected. "The valley knows you," he said. "The stones know your step, the earth knows your hands. That's more than most men ever have." The lamplight cast a warm glow across his features. Deep lines marked his face, not sharply, but with the soft definition of a man who had spent his life outdoors, squinting into sunlight, watching clouds, reading the posture of trees and wind and soil. "Do you remember," Frank asked, "the first grave you helped me dig?" Clay nodded. "The one near the birch?" he said. Frank smiled faintly. "You were all elbows and knees," he murmured. "Too much boy, not enough balance." "I still made my corner straight," Clay replied. "You did," Frank said, and the warmth in his voice wrapped itself gently around the words. Outside, night pooled in the spaces between trees. The valley's hum deepened into its evening tone, a low, steady presence beneath all other sound. Frank closed his eyes. Time to rest, he breathed, and it was unclear whether he meant himself, or the day, or the valley. Perhaps all three. Morning without rush. Frank did not wake with the dawn the next morning. The house was still. Clay rose slowly, already knowing, long before he reached the doorway, that his father's body had answered a call older than breath. Frank lay as if sleeping, face relaxed, hands folded lightly over his chest. There was no struggle etched into his features, no tension in his jaw, no tightness around his eyes. He looked as the valley would later look under snow, quiet, complete, finished in the gentlest way. Clay sat beside him for a long time. He did not cry. He did not speak. He simply breathed and felt the absence of sound in the space where Frank's voice used to live, felt the stillness where the soft shifting of weight and the faint clearing of a throat no longer occurred. But also, more quietly, he felt something else. Not a presence exactly, not a ghost, nothing sharp or strange, just a sense that the valley had taken his father back into itself like a held breath finally exhaled. Another rhythm completed, another circle closed. The making of the coffin. Clay moved carefully through the rest of the morning, as though the hours themselves might be fragile and easily broken. He went to the shed. The tools waited for him, hanging on the walls with their usual quiet dignity. But he did not reach for the shovels or the tamping bar or the spade. He walked instead to the far side of the shed, to the boards stacked neatly in a rack, planks of solid wood Frank had collected over the years. For when they're needed, he had said once, with no urgency and no fear. Today, they were needed. Clay chose the boards carefully. Straight grain, no warping, strong enough to carry weight, soft enough to accept nails without splintering. He carried them out to the small covered space behind the house, a little work area with a bench, a saw, and a square. The air was cool, but his hands were steady. He measured twice, cut once. Each stroke of the saw made a long, gentle sound, not harsh, but deep and rhythmic, like someone humming low in their chest. Wood curled away in pale coils, falling softly to the ground. He sanded the edges, smoothing roughness, rounding corners. The hammer's taps were firm, but not violent. Nails slid in with small, precise clicks. The coffin took shape gradually, not as a box, not as a container, but as a final bed for a body that had earned its rest. Clay ran his hand along the finished lid, feeling the wood's grain under his fingertips. He did not carve anything into it. No words, no symbols. Frank's life had been written instead in the shape of the valley, in the lines of the graves, in the quiet memory of every stone he had ever stood beside. No inscription could add to that. Digging for the one who taught him. When the coffin was finished, Clay returned to the cemetery. He walked to a spot near the old oak within view of the house. Overlooking the valley his father had tended for so many years. He stood still there for a long moment, feeling the ground beneath his boots. "This will do," he murmured. The earth here felt right, firm but welcoming. Not swampy, not rocky, just balanced. There was no twine this time, no formally staked corners. Clay knew the dimensions by heart. He pressed the shovel into the soil, and the earth gave way beneath it with familiar resistance. Dig, step, lift, turn. The motion was so ingrained in him now that he barely had to think. His body remembered. His shoulders knew the arc. His hands knew the weight. Yet this grave felt different. Not because it was his father's. Clay did not allow himself to think of it that way just yet. but because he was doing every part of the work himself. No machine, just the man, the shovel, and the earth. The valley watched quietly. Wind brushed gently through the branches. Birdsong was soft and sparse, as though the creatures understood the solemnity of the task. The hole deepened. Shadows cooled the air inside its walls. Clay worked without rushing, taking care with each slice of the blade, each lift of soil. When he reached the proper depth, he climbed out and looked down. The rectangle was clean and even, corners squared, walls smooth. He felt the hum beneath his feet again, steady, familiar, ever present. "It's for him," Clay said softly, though he was not sure whether he was speaking to the valley or to the earth or to something else entirely. The hum did not answer. It didn't need to. A small gathering, a long goodbye. They did not have a large crowd that afternoon. A few townspeople came, those who had known Frank from the occasional trip into the small nearby town, those who remembered a dug grave, a kind nod, a steady presence in moments of loss. They stood around the opening in their quiet clothes, hands folded, eyes lowered. Clay stood near the head of the grave, one hand resting gently on the coffin's lid. The wood felt warm under his palm. There was no priest, no long speech, just a neighbor who spoke a handful of words about Frank's constancy, about his work, about the way he seemed to belong to the valley as much as the trees and stones did. Clay listened. The words moved around him like wind through tall grass, soft, swaying, not trying to change him, just passing by. When the time came, he and two others gripped the ropes and lowered the coffin with slow, sure hands. The wood descended smoothly, the rope sliding quietly over the edges of the boards. No jolt, no slip. Just a steady journey downward, toward the waiting dark. A dark that did not threaten, only received. When the coffin settled at the bottom, Clay nodded once. The others released the ropes, coiling them back with practiced calm. One by one, the small group approached the grave, each taking a small handful of soil from the waiting pile and letting it fall. The earth landed with soft, muted taps against the wood. A simple sound, a gentle sound, a sound of things returning to where they had come from. When everyone had gone, Clay remained. He placed his hand on the grass at the edge of the grave and closed his eyes. For a moment, he let everything be exactly as it was. The open earth, the quiet valley, the weight of one long life resting gently in the hollow below. Then he rose and began to fill the grave. Returning the earth, the work of closing his father's grave was the same as every other grave, and it was not the same at all. He lifted the first shovel of soil. It landed softly, cushioning the lid of the coffin with a small, round sound. Another shovelful, and another. Soon the rhythm returned. Lift, turn, fall, settle, lift, turn, fall, settle. Clay did not rush. He did not allow his mind to jump ahead to the moment when the ground would look whole again. He stayed inside the simple act of returning earth to where it belonged. As the grave filled, the sound of soil falling grew fainter, from hollow knocks to muffled thuds to mere whispers of weight shifting. When the final layers neared the surface, Clay climbed out and finished from above, smoothing the mound with the flat of his shovel, then with his boot, and finally with his hands. He tamped the earth down lightly, not to hide anything, not to erase, but to help the ground hold together as it settled. The mound rose slightly above the earth around it. In time, it would sink, grass would grow, rain would fall, and sun would warm, and snow would rest on it in thick, quiet blankets. But for now, it sat gently under the open sky, a small, new curve on the surface of Blackwood Valley. Clay stood there until the light changed around him. Shadows lengthened, birdsong faded, the hum of the valley deepened into evening. He let his hand rest atop the new mound, fingers splayed, palm open. "Thank you," he said quietly, to his father, to the tools that had helped, to the earth that had received him without protest. Then he turned slowly and walked back toward the house. Behind him, the valley watched as it always had, unblinking, steady, carrying the weight of one more story folded gently into its soil. Nothing felt broken. Nothing felt lost. It all felt like a rhythm continuing in a slightly different key. Frank's hands would no longer lift the shovel, but the shovel remembered him. The earth would no longer feel his boots, but it remembered his weight. And Clay, now alone in the work, carried it forward. His steps, his breath, his hands, woven into the same slow pattern his father had followed for so many quiet years. The valley hummed, the ground rested, and the story drifted gently on. Even after Frank's burial, the valley did not change. It did not grow darker. It did not grow quieter. It did not feel empty. It simply continued in the slow, patient way it always had, as though his father's life had joined the same rhythm that moved through the soil, the stone, the wind, and the quiet turning of seasons. Clay moved through the days with the same care, the same steadiness, the same gentle habit of listening before acting. The tools in the shed waited for him, their silent presence a continuation rather than a reminder. The stones watched him pass on his morning walks, their shapes familiar, their shadows stretching in soft angles across the dew-damp grass. Nothing hurried, nothing pressed, nothing demanded. The valley simply breathed, and Clay breathed with it. Mornings of easy light. In the weeks that followed, the early mornings became his favorite hour, not because of the work, but because of the light, that soft, pale gold that spread slowly across the hills, lifting itself over the tops of the pines with the gentleness of a calm hand resting on a shoulder. Clay would step out onto the porch with his notebook, but he rarely opened it. Instead, he let the light settle on his skin, on the worn boards of the steps, on the distant stones that glowed faintly like old lanterns. He listened to the near silence, the breeze just beginning its day, the faint stir of wings overhead, the soft shifting of the house behind him as the wood warmed and sighed. His father had once stood here every morning, and now he did too, not as an echo, not as a replacement, but as himself, a man whose life had quietly grown into the shape of the valley's work. The hum beneath the ground felt stronger now, not louder, just clearer, as if the earth were speaking to him in a language he had finally begun to understand fully. a day of small tasks. There came a morning, soft, warm, the air almost velvety, when Clay realized the work he needed to do was simple. No burials, no ceremonies, no repairs, no heavy lifting, just tending, just walking, just being present with the land that had held so many stories and so many quiet endings. He gathered a few light tools, a brush, a cloth, a small rake, and carried them in the wheelbarrow with slow, quiet steps. The wheel rolled easily over the path, its soft crunch barely disturbing the air. He felt no urgency, no list pressing him forward, only the steady, calming sense that today would be a day of gentle work. The first stone he approached was one he'd walked by hundreds of times. A simple granite marker, nothing ornate, nothing carved in elaborate scrolls. Just a name, 2 dates, a dash between them. He brushed the surface with slow circles, the bristles whispering across the grain. The moss lifted easily, dust gathered in the cloth. The letters emerged just a bit clearer. He stepped back, breathing in. The stone seemed grateful, not in any mystical way, not in any supernatural sense, just cleaner, lighter, as if the morning air could touch it more fully. He moved on. Another stone, then another. Some needed brushing. Some needed only a touch to guide a fallen leaf aside. Some needed nothing at all. They simply wanted to be visited, to be acknowledged, to be part of the morning. Clay obliged with patient hands. The valley accepted each small gesture with its characteristic calm. Where the wind rests. Around midday, Clay reached the highest point in the cemetery, a gentle rise where the wind always seemed to pause before moving on. This was the place where Frank rested, a simple mound, grass beginning to return, soil settled in quiet curves. Clay stood there, watching the breeze ripple across the surface, a soft, rolling motion, like fingers brushing through a child's hair. He didn't speak. He didn't bow his head. He didn't feel the need to shape anything into ritual or ceremony. He simply stood in the same quiet he had stood in 100 times beside other graves, letting his breath match the wind's slow rhythm. The silence was warm, not empty, not lonely, just full of all the things that didn't need words. After a while, he placed his hand on the grass. It was cool, soft, alive. The earth had accepted its new story without hesitation. Clay straightened, his chest rising in a long, unhurried breath. Then he continued his afternoon rounds. The far field. By late afternoon, the sun had shifted into the warm gold of a long, lazy descent. Shadows lengthened, the air softened. Everything in the valley seemed to move a little more slowly. Clay pushed the wheelbarrow toward the far field, a wide, open stretch just beyond the newest section of the cemetery. He didn't often walk this far. There were no graves here, no stones, only grass and the faint trace of a deer path that curved lazily toward the tree line. But today, the field seemed to call to him, not urgently, not insistently, just quietly, like an open hand inviting rest. He left the wheelbarrow near the edge and walked out into the tall grass, feeling it brush against his legs in slow, gentle strokes. The field smelled of warm earth and late-day sunlight. The breeze moved like a long, deep breath, swaying the grass in broad, shimmering waves. Clay lay down on his back, The grass bent beneath his shoulders, forming a soft cradle that held his weight without effort. Above him, the sky stretched wide, a pale, glowing blue that deepened toward the edges into something close to silver. Clouds drifted in slow, unhurried lines, as though the entire sky were practicing the art of moving without urgency. Clay let his arms rest at his sides, palms open to the cool touch of the air. He closed his eyes. The valley hummed beneath him, that familiar vibration that had been part of his life since childhood. He let it rise through the ground, up through the grass, into his spine, into his ribs, into the quiet spaces between his thoughts. Everything felt slow, heavy, soft. His breath deepened almost by itself. Inhale, long and easy. Exhale, longer still. The rhythm felt like the rhythm of the valley itself. Slow, deep, ancient. If sleep had come to him right then, in the warm grass, under the slow sky, he would have welcomed it. Not out of tiredness, but because the moment felt shaped for rest. The last light. When Clay opened his eyes again, the sun had lowered to the ridge of distant hills. Light poured across the valley in long golden sheets, illuminating the tops of stones and the lines of fences, turning each blade of grass into a thin, glowing thread. The far field looked like a sea of molten amber, moving in slow, shimmering waves as the wind brushed its surface. Clay sat up, hands sinking slightly into the soft earth behind him. He watched as the light dimmed minute by minute, the valley easing itself toward dusk with its usual unhurried grace. A feeling settled over him, not sadness, not longing, but a calm recognition that the valley was guiding him somewhere, not physically, not into any event or place, just deeper into its rhythm, deeper into its rest, deeper into the quiet that had always been its truest voice. The valley at nightfall. Clay returned the tools to the shed with slow, deliberate movements. Each tool hung on its familiar hook. Each strap and cloth and brush was returned to its place. The order felt comforting. A final small ritual before the day closed. When he stepped outside again, the sky had shifted into twilight, deep blue with the first faint stars glimmering behind it. The air cooled just enough to feel cleansing. The valley's hum grew lower, richer, like a deep note played on a long, ancient instrument. Clay walked the familiar path back to the house, feet moving without thought, guided by habit and by the evening's rhythm. Inside, he lit the small lamp near the window, the same one his father had once sat beside. Warm amber light filled the room, softening its corners, gathering gently around the wooden walls. Clay sat in the chair, fingers resting lightly on the armrests, breath slow, body heavy in the most comforting way. He looked out the window, the valley stretching below, darkening softly, stars sprinkling their faint light across its shape. He felt something shift inside him, not a thought, not a realization, just a loosening, a quiet unwinding of something he had carried for years without knowing it. The valley was teaching him how to rest, not how to stop working, not how to sleep quickly, but how to drift, how to soften, how to let the quiet hold him the same way it held everything else. Drifting. Clay leaned back in the old wooden chair. His breath slowed once more. Inhale, light and soft. Exhale, deep and steady. The chair creaked gently beneath him, a familiar, comforting sound, like an old friend shifting to make space. The lamps glowed dimmed slightly, as though the room itself were preparing for sleep. Outside, the valley's hum softened further, becoming less a sound and more a sensation, a warm, steady presence beneath the night. Clay closed his eyes. The darkness felt cool and safe. Behind his eyelids, the shapes of the valley gathered slowly. Stacks of stone, sways of grass, curves of old hills, ripples of morning light. The gentle rise of the far field, Frank's tree, the shed door, the path home. All softened, all blurred, all drifting lightly into one another. Nothing sharp, nothing sudden, nothing demanding, just the slow collapse of waking thought into the vast, quiet rhythm of the valley. Night's embrace. Clay's breathing flattened into a long, steady pattern, a pattern that matched the slow turning of the earth beneath him. The room darkened. The lamp's glow fell away. The valley held its breath for him, not to startle, not to wait, but to welcome, gently, quietly, softly, the weight of his rest. And as Clay drifted downward into the deep, heavy warmth of sleep, the valley hummed a final low note, ancient, steady, endlessly calm, a reminder that he was held, that he was safe, that everything was exactly as it needed to be. Nothing rushed, nothing moved sharply, nothing intruded, only rest, only warmth, only the soft, endless quiet of Blackwood Valley settling gently around him as the story slipped into silence.